The robot operating system was developed somewhere around 2000, early 2010s, if I'm not mistaken, right? And it was built to make robotics very easy, right? So if you were following my lectures, you would know that a robot has multiple parts. It has the control systems, right? It will have perception systems, which is basically sensors, right? Like cameras, right? Example, cameras, lasers, and things like that, right? And then it will have some sort of processing unit, right? Some sort of computer, right? And then it could have multiple other sensors and things like that, right? And then also another part that's important is you need to do something called pose estimation, right? Which is basically trying to locate the robot in space, right? Where is the robot in a map, basically. And then I've given a entire lecture on that. If you go to the lectures, there's an introduction to pose estimation in lecture 5. Right? Again, this is just introductory. Don't be afraid. It's about a 20-minute lecture, just explaining the ideas to you. Okay, so I would encourage all of you to watch these videos. So there's pose estimation, and then there is some sort of like path planning and decision making and things like that that basically decide the large scale operations of the robot, right? Make the intelligent decisions of the robot. So all of these different parts have to talk to each other, right? This camera information has to go into the pose estimation. This camera information, and then once the pose estimation figures out where it is, then the decision making and path planning can decide how the robot should move forward, how the robot should navigate. Then it should send that information to the control system, right? So there's this constantly, you have to talk between all these systems and all these sensors and actuators, and everything needs to be able to talk to each other. So what ROS does, robot operating system does, is it makes this easy to do, right? So it makes this networking easy to do. So it's, although it's called operating system, it's also known as a meta operating system, because it runs on top of other operating systems, right? So if you had Windows or Android or Linux, right, ROS runs on top of it. So it's not a standalone operating system. It runs on top of these other systems. Now, the reason we are using Linux is because the Windows version of this is not advanced enough. They are still developing it, because ROS is also open source, right? So no one is basically making money out of it. The community itself is developing it. So the Windows version is still not that functional. The Linux version has a lot of functionality, right? The Android version also works pretty well. I've used it, but like basically the great thing about ROS is that it works on top of these other operating systems. That means each of these operating systems can communicate with these sensors. Right? So usually how you would connect a camera to a computer is you would have some sort of driver, right? Like right now, for example, when you connect your webcam to your computer, right, you will have a hardware driver, right? But what ROS does is ROS has its own, basically, again, it sits on top of all of this and provides an easy interface that all of this can network together, right, and connect together. So that's a very basic introduction to ROS. So as I mentioned, it's a open source system, right? And the way they communicate with each other is you have this node system, right? So for example, if I have a camera, I will have something called a camera node, right? And then I'll have some sort of computer here, right, in the robot, some sort of processing unit, right? So let's say this is the computer of the robot, right? So the computer or some sort of processing, let's actually call this, instead of computer, let's just say processing unit, okay? You need some sort of processing application, right? Like if I'm getting camera images from the robot, I need to process those images to do something, right? So let's call that the processing unit. So this will have its own node, And this camera node will be communicating with this processing node, right? So when it's communicating, what it will do is it will publish the camera data. And this processing node will subscribe to the data, right? So this all the information coming from the camera will be published, and the processing unit will be subscribed and listening to this data. And then it will do sort of all the processing that it will do, and then it will send a signal to the control system, right? So again, it will publish its own set of commands to the control system. So there'll be a different node for the control. So this is a control node. There'll be a different node for the control system. And that's how basically all this communication happens. There are different nodes handling different things, and they can communicate with each other. They can publish information, they can subscribe information, and they can talk to each other, right? So how these nodes are made is they are just simple programs. They are programs. So you can actually code these nodes, right? And you can code them in all sorts of languages. You can use Python, you can use C++, right? You can use MATLAB, right? You can use Java, you can use C#. There's a whole bunch of languages that ROS supports. So what you would do is you would write these nodes, and then basically all these systems will be able to talk to each other. Right? So that's basically how ROS functions, and it creates this network that you can easily build, right? So what controls this entire network is something called the ROS master. Okay, so I'm not going to go into any more detail than this. This level of understanding is enough. The point I'm trying to make is what ROS does is it helps to communicate between the different components in a robot, right? Because a robot will have sensors, it will have computers, it will have motors, right? And we want all of these systems to be able to communicate with each other. And what ROS enables is a common framework to do that. And it's very easy to learn as well, right? So if any of you are interested in learning how to do ROS, because I think right now it's a good skill to have, right? You can go to ROS Wiki. And when you go to the second link here, it says ROS tutorials. Right? Basically, it will start from the beginner level and teach you how to build a simple ROS node, essentially, right? And trust me, although this sounds a bit complicated, it's very easy to write one of these. You can even start with MATLAB, right? Because there's a MATLAB library for ROS as well. So you can start accessing sensors, like for example, your webcam in your laptop, you can use ROS to access that webcam and publish the webcam images, or even take that webcam images and process it and do something with it, right? So ROS makes it very easy to do that, right? And you can even use something like MATLAB to easily do that. Okay, so ROS is kind of this framework that helps things makes things easier.